I hope what you start to see is that there's this joining up between the Old and the New Testament. But what we're reading in Daniel 8, as Daniel introduces us further to the character and this person of the antichrist, is we see this person who's rising up in opposition to God. But one of the things we begin to learn, and something that we'll come back to and look at when we look a little bit more at how this all comes together in Revelation, we start to see that the focus of this antichrist, the focus of this man of lawlessness, appears to be against the people of God. And one of the big debates, and something that we'll come back to later, is something that theologians have wrestled with over many centuries. Is Daniel, is John, is Paul, is Jesus talking about the church universal, or are they talking about the people of Israel? Many commentators would hold that what we're reading is a picture that the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, will be focused specifically against the people of God, against the nation of Israel. But for now, let's capture something of what this passage is trying to communicate with us. In Daniel chapter 2, we saw this image, this vision that Nebuchadnezzar had of this statue, and we saw man's perception of empires and power. And the message that came through that was that authority was given by God. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has this period of madness, and again it's rooted in the message that power is given by God, authority is given by God. And in Daniel chapter 5, when we see with Belshazzar the writing on the wall, mene, mene, the finger pointing on the wall, again there's a consistent theme coming through that God is communicating through Daniel, that these powers, these seats of authority, are all authority that is allowed by God. The reason for realising that this is a theme that goes through the book of Daniel is that power and authority and kingship comes from God. And although some kings rise up in rebellion to God and are not God-fearing, God allows them power in order to achieve purposes. And that doesn't mean that God is evil or is working in some inappropriate way, but he permits sin and he permits evil in order to achieve purposes, and we'll look a little bit more of that in our next session. But the message for today is, as we see Daniel introducing us more to this person and character of the Antichrist, is to realise that this is not something that's out of control, but it's something where God is allowing the fullness of the evil of humanity to run its course in order to display the futility of sin and the futility of evil, and through that to see the glorious salvation that God can bring. In chapter 7, Daniel introduces us to this horn, this Antichrist that's rising up in opposition to God. And in chapter 8, he gives us a little bit more of a sense of the activity of the Antichrist, which we can see being brought through Paul's teaching in 2 Thessalonians 2. But we also began to see that the authority that the Antichrist has is permitted. And for us with an understanding of a God who hates sin, why would he allow such things? Chapter 9 begins to introduce us to God's purpose in all of this, to give us a sense of why. But it also begins to give us a framework for the people of Israel. In chapter 9 verse 24, it makes it clear that what's been decreed is for your people. He's speaking to Daniel, who is a Jew, who's talking about the people of Israel, and your holy city. In other words, Jerusalem. And so there is a focus very much that what we're reading about has a framework for the nation of Israel. At this point, I'm conscious that I'm back on my rice paper path, my rice paper road that I spoke about, where I'm treading on ground which is very sensitive. There's much written, much said, much debated and much believed about the nation of Israel and how that all links into the end of times. And I'm not even going to begin to scratch the surface on where some people itch with this. Suffice to recognise that some of what I say may not be agreed by everybody, may be debated, but I would encourage us to come back to the heart of God and look beyond maybe sometimes where we don't always agree, to actually look at what the purpose of God is in revealing his heart for the end of time.